My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm 32 years old, and a few months ago, I was summoned to my parents' house to be financially and emotionally bled dry for the sake of my younger brother. They saw me as their fixer, their endless line of credit, their emotional punching bag. But they had no idea that, for the first time in my life, I was ready for them. Before I tell you how I uncovered a 30-year-old secret that dismantled my entire family during a single, stormy evening, let me know where you're all watching from in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. It all started, as it always did, with a phone call about Jason. I was in my bookstore, the reading room, long after we'd closed for the night. The warm, comforting smell of old paper and freshly ground coffee beans hung in the air. This place is my sanctuary. It's the only thing in my life I've ever built entirely on my own, with my own two hands, and it's the only place I feel completely, unequivocally myself. I was sweeping the floor, the soft, rhythmic scratch of the broom against the aged hardwood, a form of meditation, a way to clear my head after a long day. That's when my phone, lying on the front counter, began to buzz. The screen lit up with a name that sent an immediate, familiar jolt of anxiety through my gut. Mom. My stomach instantly tightened into a cold, hard knot. My mother, Linda, never called just to chat. Her calls weren't conversations. They were bulletins, announcements of some new drama that had invariably erupted. And 99% of the time, that drama had a name, a smug face, and a history of spectacular failures. Jason. I let it ring, the harsh electronic sound cutting through the peaceful silence of my store. One ring, two, three. Each one felt like a jab, a reminder of my role in the family ecosystem. I was the responsible one, the stable one, the one they called when the golden boy stumbled. I finally took a deep, steadying breath and swiped to answer, holding the phone to my ear. Hi, Mom. Michael. Her voice was clipped, cool, and completely devoid of any warmth. It was the voice she used for business, for transactions, for dealing with problems. I'm not going to waste time with pleasantries. We have a situation. What kind of situation? I asked, my voice flat. I already knew the answer. It was always the same story, just a different chapter. It's your brother's company, she said, confirming my silent prediction. There have been complications. It's collapsed. I stayed silent, letting the weight of her words settle. I leaned the broom against a bookshelf and pictured the long, sad history of Jason's complications. The nightclub shut down for health code violations. The much-hyped tech app that never launched. The so-called consulting firm that was little more than an excuse for expensive lunches funded by our parents. Each time, the family savings were raided, family friends were hit up for investments, and I was expected to offer up my time and emotional support like some kind of designated mourner for his endless parade of failures. We need to have a family meeting, she continued, her voice hardening into steel. Be at the house. 7 p.m. tomorrow. We need to talk about Jason and formulate a solution. The wording was deliberate. Formulate a solution. It wasn't a request for a chat. It wasn't an invitation to comfort a grieving brother. It was a summons. A demand for my presence at a trial where I was already expected to be the sacrificial lamb, where my life's work would be laid on the altar to save him. For 32 years, I had played my part without question. Tonight was the night the play was going to end. I'll be there, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. Good, she said, and hung up. No, how are you? No, talk to you later. Just a final, decisive click. I lowered the phone and stared at my reflection in the dark storefront window. For a moment, I saw the same tired eyes, the same quiet, accommodating face that had stared back at me for years. But tonight, something else was there, too. A flicker of something hard and cold in their depths. The part of me that used to ache for their approval, that used to crumble under their disappointment, was gone. It had died on the vine, withered from years of neglect. In its place, something new and resolute had taken root. I walked over to the small, cluttered office in the back of the store and unlocked the bottom drawer of my old metal desk. I reached in and pulled out a thick, heavy file folder. On the tab, written in stark, black marker, were two words: Jason Reynolds, evidence. I opened it on my desk. Inside, neatly organized, were bank statements, printed emails, detailed timelines, and notarized legal documents. I had been preparing for this day for weeks, ever since the first whispers of this latest disaster had reached me. They thought they were summoning the same old Michael, the reliable, quiet son who would do anything to keep the peace. They had no idea who was about to walk through their door. The sheep was done being led to the slaughter. Tomorrow, the wolf was coming to dinner. Before I walk you through every tense moment of that meeting and the absolute chaos that unfolded, I need you to understand why. Why this time was different. Why a lifetime of turning the other cheek had finally come to an end. It's not about one big, dramatic betrayal. It's about death by 1,000 tiny cuts. A slow, methodical bleeding out of self-worth that happens so gradually you don't even realize you're dying until you're already a ghost in your own life. Let's go back to when I was 10 years old. I had won the state-level academic decathlon. For a nerdy, quiet kid like me, this was the Olympics. It was a huge deal for my school, and an even bigger deal for me. I'd practiced for months, memorizing facts about history, science, and literature until my head was buzzing. I remember standing on that brightly lit stage in the huge, unfamiliar high school auditorium. The medal they placed around my neck was heavy and gold and felt like the most important object in the world. My heart was pounding with a pride so big and pure I thought it would burst right out of my chest. The principal shook my hand, the flashbulbs from the local paper went off, and I grinned, scanning the audience, looking for the two faces that mattered most. My mom had promised they'd be right up front. She'd save the seats. I looked, and I saw two empty chairs. Not in the back, not off to the side. Right up front. Empty. A hollow pit opened in my stomach, swallowing all the pride and joy from moments before. I took the bus home with my coach. When I walked in the door, the house was buzzing with energy. My parents were there, laughing, animated. They'd just gotten back from one of Jason's soccer games. He was 7. It wasn't a championship or a playoff or anything remotely important. Just a regular season game for 7-year-olds. "How'd it go, champ?" my dad asked Jason, ruffling his hair. "We lost," Jason mumbled, kicking at the rug. 5-1. "Hey, that doesn't matter," my mom chirped, pulling him into a hug. "You tried so hard out there. We saw you run. You were the fastest one on the field." That night, Jason got to pick his favorite pizza for dinner and was given a new video game for trying so hard. I quietly showed them the heavy gold medal. My dad took it, weighed it in his hand for a second. "Ha, that's nice, son. Good job," he said, before handing it back and turning his attention to the TV. My medal ended up in a shoebox in the back of my closet. That night, I learned the first lesson. My concrete achievements were worth less than my brother's mediocre efforts. Fast forward 8 years. I was 18. I knew my parents didn't have a college fund set aside for me. All their spare cash seemed to be perpetually tied up in Jason's hobbies. From expensive hockey gear to a drum set he played for exactly 2 weeks. So I worked my tail off in high school. I wasn't charismatic or popular like Jason. I didn't go to parties. I was the guy you could always find in the library on a Friday night. And it paid off. I earned a significant academic scholarship to a good state university. It wasn't a full ride, but it was the key that unlocked the door to my future. I remember waiting for the perfect moment to tell them. We were all at the dinner table, a rare occasion. My mom had made pot roast. I waited for a lull in the conversation, my acceptance letter folded in my pocket, my heart thumping with nervous excitement. "So, I have some news," I said, my voice a little shaky. "I heard back from the university. I got in. And they offered me the chancellor's scholarship." My mother smiled faintly. "Oh, Michael, that's wonderful." My father, Robert, took a slow sip of his water. He nodded once, a curt, businesslike gesture. "Good job, Michael. We knew you could do it." And that was it. The entire celebration. It lasted 15 seconds. Before I could even begin to describe what the scholarship entailed, my father turned his full attention, his beaming, enthusiastic attention, to my brother. "Jason," he said, his voice suddenly full of energy. "Your mother and I were talking. You've been doing fine in your classes. And since you're graduating high school soon, we thought it was time you had a decent car. We were thinking a Mustang. Convertible. What do you think?" Jason, who had a C average and whose greatest accomplishment that year was getting a 3-day suspension for a senior prank involving the school mascot, lit up like a Christmas tree. For the next 20 minutes, the entire dinner conversation was consumed by engine sizes, trim levels, paint colors, and insurance plans for Jason's new car. I just sat there, pushing my pot roast around my plate, the full weight of my scholarship, my ticket out, feeling like a handful of dust. The lump that formed in my throat was hard and bitter. It was the taste of being invisible. I had to earn my future with years of sweat and perfect grades, and it was met with a polite, dismissive nod. He just had to exist, and he was rewarded with a $50,000 sports car. This was the second, more important lesson. My value was functional, his was inherent. I was an investment that was expected to pay off quietly. He was a luxury to be endlessly enjoyed. After college, the pattern solidified. Jason bounced from one passion to another, each one more expensive and ill-conceived than the last. He dropped out of community college after one semester because it stifled his creativity. My parents sent him on a trip to Europe to find himself. He came back with a vague idea to become a nightclub promoter. They gave him $50,000 as seed money. The club was a disaster, a sinkhole of cash that closed in 6 months after a string of health code violations. I meanwhile was working. I worked 2 jobs. From 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., I was a barista at a Starbucks, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to me all day. From 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., I was a clerk at a dusty old independent bookstore. I lived in a tiny, run-down apartment with a leaky faucet and an air mattress on the floor for a bed. Every single dollar I didn't use for rent or ramen noodles went into a savings account. That account held a dream of a place that was quiet and warm and filled with stories. A place that was the complete opposite of my family home. That dream became the reading room. I remember signing the lease for this place like it was yesterday. It was a forgotten old camera shop on Main Street, covered in a thick layer of grime. I spent every spare moment for 4 months renovating it myself. I learned how to plaster walls from watching YouTube tutorials. I sanded these old hardwood floors by hand until my knuckles were raw and bleeding. I designed and built every single bookshelf, piece by piece, in my tiny apartment living room. When I finally had my grand opening, I sent an invitation to my parents. They were in Florida visiting Jason. He had moved there after the nightclub fiasco, deciding he was now destined to be a real estate mogul. They sent him another $25,000 to get his license and get started. They sent me a good luck card. But the reading room grew. Against all odds, it became something special. It became more than a business. It was a sanctuary for the people in our town. We hosted poetry nights where shy teenagers would read their work for the first time. We had author signings. We had a thriving book club for seniors. Kids would come and do their homework in the cafe after school, their parents knowing they were in a safe, quiet place. It was my life's work. It was the one thing in the world that was truly, undeniably mine. It was tangible proof that I existed, that I had value, that I could create something good and lasting. And it was this, my sanctuary, my proof of life, that they were now demanding I sacrifice on the altar of my brother's latest, most spectacular failure. The breaking point, the moment the final thread of hope inside me snapped, came a few weeks before that fateful summons. It was the initial phone call about Jason's newest collapsed venture, some flashy, sustainable fashion tech startup that was heavy on buzzwords and light on any actual products or business plan. "He needs $500,000, Michael," my mother had said over the phone, her voice chillingly calm, as if discussing the weather. "The investors are getting aggressive. They are threatening to sue. This could be a huge scandal. It could ruin the family name." I remember letting out a short, sharp, bitter laugh. "500,000? Mom, where in God's name do you think I have that kind of money?" Her reply was instant, cold, and calculated. "Your store," she said. as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. We looked up the property value online. The building and the business. It's worth at least that. You can sell it. It's the only way to make this go away quickly. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. The casual way she spoke about it, the way she dismissed my entire life's work as a simple asset to be liquidated, it stole the air from my lungs. No, I said. It was the first time in my life I had said that word to them with any real force behind it. The silence on the other end was heavy, charged with disbelief. Then my father got on the line. His voice was low and dangerous, a rumbling threat. Don't you say no to me, boy. Your brother is in trouble. This is about family. Family helps family. You will sell that store or you can consider your inheritance gone. You will be cut off. Do you understand me? You'll have nothing from us. And that was it. The quiet part said out loud. The threat that had hung over my head my whole life. The conditional nature of their love, their support laid bare. It wasn't about family. It was about protecting Jason. It was about protecting their investment, their golden boy, their precious legacy. I had always been the backup plan, the safety net. And now that I was refusing to play my part, I was disposable. I hung up the phone. My whole body was shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so pure and cold it felt like ice water flooding my veins. I walked through my empty bookstore that night, my hand trailing along the spines of the books, each one a testament to my hard work. And I realized this was my breaking point. The next day, my best friend and store manager, Emma, found me staring blankly at a spreadsheet, not having typed a single number for over an hour. Emma was the only person in my life who saw the dynamic for what it was. She was sharp, loyal, and had a built-in detector for manipulative nonsense. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, placing a steaming mug of coffee on my desk. I told her everything. The phone call, the demand, the threats about the inheritance and being cut off. She listened patiently, her expression hardening with every word I spoke. When I finished, she didn't offer the usual comforting platitudes. She leaned against the desk, folded her arms, and looked me straight in the eye. So, what are you going to do? I don't know. I confessed, my voice weak. They're my family. No, Michael, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. They are your relatives. A family doesn't do this. A family doesn't treat one son like a prince and the other like a pack mule. They're vampires, and they have been feeding on your sense of duty your whole life. They will keep draining you until you are nothing but dust. When are you going to stop letting them? Her words were harsh, but they were the truest words anyone had ever spoken to me. They were the spark I needed. In that moment, the part of me that had always held out a sliver of hope that they would one day see me, that they would one day change, finally died. And in its place, a new, cold resolve was born. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to fight back. I was going to unearth every ugly secret they had buried to protect him. That afternoon, I looked up the number for a man my old business law professor had once called the bulldog when you need one, a lawyer named Arthur Thompson. I picked up the phone, and for the first time I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man with a plan. That phone call, that single act of defiance, led me down a path that would change everything. And it all culminated in that tension-filled meeting in my parents' living room, the one they had so foolishly called. My first meeting with Arthur Thompson wasn't what I had expected at all. His office wasn't in some high-rise temple of glass and steel downtown. It was a modest, second-floor space above an old bakery on a quiet side street. The air in the stairwell smelled faintly of old paper, worn leather, and cinnamon from the bakers downstairs. Mr. Thompson himself was a man in his late 50s with kind, intelligent eyes, a firm handshake, and an air of unshakable calm. He looked more like a history professor than a high-powered lawyer, dressed in a comfortable-looking tweed jacket. I found myself sitting in a worn leather armchair across from his large mahogany desk, and for nearly 2 hours, I poured out everything. 32 years of frustration, of being overlooked, of being the family shock absorber. I told him about the academic awards my parents missed, the car Jason got for simply graduating high school, the constant funneling of money into his failed ventures. I laid out the current crisis, the demand to sell my store, the threats about my inheritance, the whole ugly mess. I expected him to interrupt with legal jargon, to talk about contracts and torts and fiduciary duties. Instead, he just listened, his gaze steady and focused, making a few quiet notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finally finished, a ragged, exhausted silence hung in the air. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. "Michael," he began, his voice steady and grave. "Thank you for trusting me with that. I want to be very clear. This is about much more than an inheritance dispute. This is about more than a simple business bailout. From everything you're describing, your brother Jason isn't just a failed entrepreneur. He's a con artist, predator, and your parents, whether consciously or not, are his primary enablers." Hearing a respected outsider say the words I had barely dared to think was like a physical blow. It was validating and terrifying all at once. The shame I'd carried, thinking maybe I was the problem, began to recede, replaced by the chilling reality of the situation. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They're my family. They have all the power, all the money. In their world, maybe," Mr. Thompson countered. "But not in mine. In my world, facts have power. Evidence has power. The truth has power." He leaned back in his chair. "So we fight. But we don't fight with emotion. That's their battlefield, and they've had decades of practice defeating you there. You'll lose every time. We fight with a mountain of cold, hard, undeniable proof." He became my strategist, my general. He laid out a battle plan, giving me a sense of control for the first time in my life. He called it my homework. "First," he said, tapping the legal pad with his pen, "we need to establish a clear pattern of behavior. I want you to go back and document every single failed business venture of Jason's that you can remember. Get as specific as you can. Dates, names of the companies, amounts of money you know for a fact your parents gave him, any specific details you can recall. We need to paint a picture of a serial failure funded by blind enablement. Second," he continued, "we need to find other victims. A man who cons sophisticated investors out of $500,000 doesn't just wake up one day and decide to do it. He practices on smaller fish first. He has a history. Your job is to find them." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine with a serious intensity. "This is going to be the hardest part, Michael. You'll have to go digging into things you've probably spent your life trying to ignore. You'll have to revisit painful memories. But if we're going to win this, we need to build a fortress of facts so high and so solid that they can't possibly climb over it, and so dense they can't smash through it." Before I left, he gave me a stern, detailed warning about recording conversations, explaining the specific one-party consent laws in our state. "They will threaten you again, Michael. They will try to manipulate you. And when they do," he said, handing me a tiny, high-quality digital recorder, "we will need it, legally obtained." I left his office not feeling happy, but feeling something far more useful, purposeful. The grief I felt for the family I wished I had was still there, but now it was being channeled, converted into a cold, clean-burning fuel. My transformation from victim to warrior didn't happen in a single leap. It was a slow, painstaking process, a series of small, difficult steps, guided by the plan Mr. Thompson had laid out. And I wasn't alone. Emma was my steadfast co-conspirator. Her loyalty was a rock in the middle of my swirling emotional chaos. While I spent my nights digging through old family photo albums, journals, and bank statements to create a detailed timeline of Jason's expensive failures, she took on the task of finding his other victims. She was a natural-born digital detective, something I had neither the skill nor the patience for. People who get scammed are often too embarrassed or too scared to go to the police, she explained one night, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop screen in the back office of the bookstore. We were surrounded by stacks of books and mugs of cold coffee. But they love to complain anonymously online. It's a way of shouting into the void, of feeling less alone. She spent days, night after night, scouring obscure investor forums, local community Facebook groups, and business review websites, searching for Jason's name, for the names of his shell companies. Finally, after chasing down a dozen dead ends, she found it. A short, bitter thread on a small-time investor forum. The title of the post was simple and heartbreaking. Anyone else lose money with Reynolds' sustainable fashion? The thread was a goldmine of misery. There were half a dozen people, each telling a depressingly similar story. A slick, impressive presentation by the handsome and charismatic Jason Reynolds. Grand promises of guaranteed, high-yield returns, and the constant reassuring mention of his well-respected family, especially his father, the retired banking executive. And then, after they had wired the money, came the excuses, the delays, and finally, the crushing silence. The money was gone. One name stood out from the others, George Wilson. He was a retired high school English teacher who had lost his entire retirement savings, a staggering $75,000. His post was the most detailed, the most articulate, and the most painful to read. And he lived just 2 towns over. I knew I had to meet him. Arranging it was delicate. I sent him a private message through the forum, carefully explaining who I was, Jason's brother, and that I was trying to build a legal case against him. At first, he was intensely suspicious, even hostile. He thought it was some kind of trick, another Reynolds family scam. Like brother, he wrote back. But I persisted. I was honest and direct. I told him I had also been a victim of my family's financial manipulations, and that I was determined to see justice done. I offered to meet him anywhere, anytime, with my lawyer present if he preferred. Finally, after a week of cautious back and forth, he agreed to meet me for coffee. We met at a neutral, roadside diner halfway between our towns. Mr. Wilson was a quiet, dignified man in his early 70s, with weary eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. He told me his story, his voice soft but filled with a steely anger. He described how Jason had charmed him and his wife, coming to their home, remembering their names, asking about their grandchildren. He had made them feel special, like they were getting in on an exclusive opportunity. He talked about his father's sterling reputation in the banking world, promising that this investment was as safe as a house. He looked me right in the eye and lied. "Mr. Reynolds," the old teacher said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I taught kids for 40 years. I prided myself on being a good judge of character." He saw my picture with my wife, who passed away 2 years ago, and told me how this investment would secure my future and honor her memory. He used her. He used my love for her to steal from me. He took a shaky breath. He didn't just take my money. He took my faith in people. Listening to him, my own personal grievance, my anger over my store and my inheritance, felt small and selfish. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice for good, decent people like George Wilson. I promised him, looking him right in the eye, that I would do everything in my power to make things right. He became my first true ally in this fight, a man whose quiet dignity gave me strength. He agreed to provide a sworn, notarized statement detailing his entire experience with Jason. The final piece of my homework was the most emotionally taxing. On Mr. Thompson's advice, I began using the small digital recorder. It felt slimy, like a deep betrayal of what family was supposed to be, but he was adamant. "They will threaten you again, Michael, and we will need it." He was right. A week before the family meeting, my mother called. Her tone was completely different this time. The cold command was gone, replaced by a syrupy, pleading sweetness. "Michael, honey, it's Mom. I was just thinking about you. Please just think about this whole situation. Your brother is an absolute wreck. He's not eating, he's not sleeping. This could destroy him. You have to help. You're his big brother. Even just a little bit of money from the store's profits would be enough to get these investors off his back for now. It's not about the money, Mom, and you know it," I said, my voice flat, my thumb resting on the record button. Her tone shifted on a dime. The sweetness vanished, replaced by a familiar, acidic venom. "It's always been about jealousy, hasn't it? It eats you alive. You have that little store, and that's all you'll ever have. You can't stand that your father and I love your brother, that we support his big dreams while you play shopkeeper. You are a selfish, bitter little man." Click. The recording captured it all. The manipulation, the lies, the poison. It was ugly, but it was evidence. The most crucial breakthrough, however, came from the most unexpected source imaginable. 2 days before the meeting, I got a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer it, assuming it was a telemarketer. "Hello, Michael." The voice on the other end was a frantic, urgent whisper. Took me a second to place it. It was my cousin, Sarah, the daughter of my father's sister, Aunt Diane. We were never particularly close, but we were always friendly at the obligatory holiday gatherings. I knew her family was financially dependent on my father's generosity, which meant she always towed the family line, laughing at my father's jokes and praising my mother's cooking. "Sarah, is everything okay?" "I can't talk for long," she rushed, the words tumbling out. "They'll absolutely kill me if they find out I called you. But I heard them talking, and you need to know. Uncle Robert, he had his lawyer over today. He's changing the will. He's writing you out of everything, making Jason the sole beneficiary. And Jason, he's been telling everyone in the family that you're having some kind of mental breakdown, and that's why you're doing all this." My blood ran cold. It was one thing to hear the threats from them directly. It was another to know they were actively, methodically poisoning the rest of the family against me. "But there's more," she said, her voice dropping even lower, filled with a mix of fear and guilt. "I overheard them talking. They think they have you trapped. But they're worried about old financial documents. Uncle Robert has a home office in the attic at the old house. The one nobody's used since he retired years ago. He keeps everything up there. If there's anything that can prove a long-term pattern of what he gave Jason over the years, it's in that room." Then she gave me the last, critical piece of information, a gift of conscience. The spare key to the house is still under the loose brick by the back porch. It's always been there. And Mom, Aunt Linda, she always kept a key to that office hidden inside the old music box on the living room mantelpiece. The one that plays, Fur Elise, click. She was gone. I stood there in the silence of my apartment, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah had just handed me a key, a literal and figurative key to unlocking the entire truth. But it meant I had to do something I never in my wildest dreams thought I would do. I had to break into my own childhood home. I had to become a thief to find the truth. The decision was made in an instant. There was no turning back now. The stakes had just been raised higher than I could have ever imagined. The next afternoon was gray and overcast, the sky a heavy, bruised purple that threatened rain. It matched my mood perfectly. According to Sarah's intel, my parents were at their weekly bridge club, a 4-hour affair they never missed. This was my window. Driving to my childhood home felt profoundly strange, like visiting a foreign country where I happened to know the street names. Every landmark was a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. There was the park where I fell off the swings and broke my arm, my dad impatiently telling me to walk it off. There was the corner store where I used to buy baseball cards, while Jason got whatever candy he wanted. Pulling up to the house itself, a sprawling 2-story colonial my father was so intensely proud of, I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't coming home. I was infiltrating enemy territory. I parked 3 houses down the street and walked, my keys digging into my palm. My hoodie was pulled up, and my heart was thumping a nervous, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt exposed, a trespasser, certain that at any moment a neighbor would peer through their blinds, recognize me, and call the police. I slipped around to the back of the house, my feet sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. The back porch was exactly as I remembered it. I knelt down, my fingers finding the loose brick near the foundation almost by instinct. And there it was, cold and metallic, covered in a thin layer of dirt. The key. Letting myself into the silent house was the strangest, most violating feeling of all. It smelled the same, my mother's cloying, lemony potpourri and the faint, sterile scent of pine sol. But the warmth that should have been there was gone. The house felt like a museum, a perfectly preserved stage set for a family that had never really been what it seemed to the outside world. I moved quickly, quietly, my sneakers silent on the polished hardwood floors. I went straight to the living room. The ornate porcelain music box was on the mantelpiece, just as Sarah had said. My hand trembled as I lifted the delicate lid. The tinny, familiar notes of Fur Elise, a tune my mother loved, plinked out into the silent room. And there, nestled in the faded red velvet lining, was a small ornate brass key. The key to the attic office. The key to the truth. The attic stairs creaked under my weight, each sound an indictment, an announcement of my transgression. The office was exactly as I remembered it from years ago when I was a kid and wasn't allowed inside. It was my father's private sanctuary. Now it was dusty, filled with old, heavy furniture covered in white sheets, and lined with tall, gray metal filing cabinets. It was a mausoleum of my father's career, a monument to a man I was realizing I had never truly known. This was the moment of truth. Mr. Thompson had been clear. I needed to find a paper trail. Bank transfers, loan agreements, anything that showed a direct financial link from my parents to Jason's string of failed businesses. I started pulling open drawers, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. It was a sea of paper. Decades of tax returns, mortgage documents, stock portfolios, all meticulously organized. My father was nothing if not thorough. I found what I was looking for in the third cabinet, in a drawer labeled Family Finances. Tucked in the back was a thick folder with a single, handwritten label, J.R. Ventures. My brother's initials. My hands shook as I opened it. It was all there, a detailed, chronological history of my father's financial folly. A $50,000 wire transfer to a shell corporation to launch the nightclub. A $100,000 cashier's check, noted in the margins as app development. Another $75,000 line of credit for his disastrous consulting business. It was a paper trail of his blind indulgence and Jason's staggering incompetence. This was the smoking gun. This would corroborate the investor stories and prove that my parents weren't just enabling him. They were actively funding his fraudulent schemes. I was about to pack it all up into my briefcase when something else caught my eye. Tucked away at the very back of the deep drawer, almost hidden, was a small, locked wooden box. It wasn't a file box. It was personal, made of dark cherry wood. It had my mother's initials, LR, elegantly carved on the lid. A powerful and dangerous curiosity got the better of me. I tried the small brass key from the music box. It fit. The lock clicked open. Inside, the box was filled with the relics from my mother's past, from a life before me. There were old, faded photographs of her as a young woman. There were bundles of letters, tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. There was a dried corsage, its petals crumbling to the touch. And at the bottom, there was a small, thin diary bound in worn, cracking leather. I knew I shouldn't. It felt like a sacrilege, a violation of a person I thought I knew. But I had come this far. I had to understand. I opened the diary. The entries were from before I was born, when my parents were newly married. They were filled with the initial hopes and dreams of a young wife. But as I read on, the tone shifted, darkened. It became lonely, resentful, desperate. My father was always working, always traveling, always obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder. My mother felt neglected, beautiful and invisible in their big, empty house. Then I untied the ribbon on the letters. They weren't from my father. They were from another man. Passionate, secret, love letters, filled with a longing and an intimacy my parents had never shared. An affair. A long, serious affair. My breath caught in my throat. At the very bottom of the box, beneath the letters, was a single, sealed envelope from a medical laboratory. It was dated 30 years ago, shortly after Jason was born. It wasn't addressed to my father. It was addressed to my mother and the man from the letters. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear the brittle paper open. It wasn't a letter. It was a report. A legal document. Paternity test. I scanned the page, my eyes jumping past the technical jargon to the conclusion at the bottom. The words swam before my eyes, but their meaning was brutally, world-shatteringly clear. The alleged father is hereby excluded as the biological father of the child. Probability of paternity, 0%. The air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. I sat down hard on the dusty floor, the paper rattling in my hand like a dead leaf. Jason, my father, Robert Reynolds, was not Jason's biological father. Everything, my entire life, every slight, every injustice, every moment of blatant favoritism, snapped into a horrifying, crystal-clear focus. It was like a bomb had gone off in my head, and in the eerie, ringing silence that followed, all the chaos of my past suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. The relentless, over-the-top praise for Jason's smallest achievements. The desperate, obsessive need to see him succeed, to shower him with gifts and opportunities. The endless second chances. It wasn't love. It was a lie. The 30-year performance. My father wasn't indulging his beloved son. He was desperately trying to convince the world, and more importantly himself, that Jason was truly his. He was covering for my mother's betrayal, burying his own deep, secret humiliation under a mountain of performative, aggressive favoritism. And I was the inconvenient truth, the real son, the living, breathing, constant reminder of what a real heir was supposed to be. My successes didn't make him proud. They made him feel guilty. They exposed the lie. My very existence was a threat to the fragile fantasy he had constructed around my brother. I didn't feel anger in that moment. That came later. In that dusty attic office, surrounded by the ghosts of my family's secrets, I felt a profound, bottomless pity for the broken man I called my father. And then, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. The war I was fighting had just changed. This wasn't about saving my store anymore. It wasn't even just about getting justice for Mr. Wilson and the other victims. It was about reclaiming the truth of my own life. I carefully placed the paternity test and a few of the most damning love letters into my briefcase along with the financial documents. As I locked the attic door and crept out of that house for what I knew would be the last time as a son, I was no longer shaking. I was calm. I was armed with the truth, and I was going to use it as a weapon. The next evening, I walked up the familiar stone pathway to my parents' house. The porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow, a complete lie. The house looked the same as it had 2 days ago, but now I saw it through new, unclouded eyes. It wasn't a home. It was a stage, the meticulously maintained setting for a decades-long play of denial and deception. And tonight I was here to burn the theater to the ground. Mr. Thompson was waiting for me at the door. His solid, reassuring presence a silent anchor in the storm I was about to unleash. He wasn't just my lawyer tonight. He was my witness. He gave me a firm, steadying nod. "Ready, Michael? Ready?" I said, my voice even, my briefcase feeling heavy and powerful in my hand. My mother opened the door. She wore a forced, tight smile, her eyes darting nervously between me and Mr. Thompson. "Michael, Arthur, please, come in." We stepped inside. The living room had been arranged like a corporate boardroom for an execution. My father sat in his favorite oversized wingback chair, the king on his throne, radiating an aura of impatient authority. Jason was slouched on the plush sofa next to him, scrolling through his phone, looking bored and entitled, as if this were just another minor inconvenience his parents would handle. An unfamiliar man in an expensive, ill-fitting suit, their lawyer I presumed, sat stiffly on a separate chair, a folder balanced on his knees. And, to my surprise, my Aunt Diane was there, perched nervously on the edge of the love seat, clutching a cup of tea. My mother had clearly brought her in for reinforcements, a supposedly neutral party who would surely side with them and bear witness to my selfishness and ingratitude. It was a foolish, desperate miscalculation. "Thank you all for coming," my father began, his voice booming with the false magnanimity he used when he was about to lay down the law. "We are here tonight to resolve a very serious family matter, a matter of loyalty, of responsibility." "Michael," he said, fixing me with a look of profound disappointment, "your brother has made some unfortunate mistakes, but he is our family, and we have come up with a solution regarding your bookstore that is more than fair to everyone involved." He was about to launch into his prepared speech, a lecture filled with guilt and obligation, but I held up a hand, A simple, decisive gesture. "Stop," I said. The single word cut through the tense, expectant atmosphere in the room like a shard of glass. All eyes snapped to me. Jason looked up from his phone, annoyed. My mother flinched. Their lawyer blinked. And my father looked utterly stunned, his jaw tightening with outrage that I had dared to interrupt his sermon. I didn't look at my briefcase full of evidence. I didn't look at Jason. I looked straight into the eyes of Robert Reynolds. "Before we talk about my store," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, forcing them all to lean in to hear. "Before we talk about money, or solutions, or family loyalty, I have a question for you. And I want you to think very, very carefully before you answer it." I leaned forward slightly in my chair. "Tell me, Father, why do you love Jason so much?" The question hung in the air, bizarre, personal, and completely unexpected. It threw their entire script out the window. Jason snorted a laugh. "What kind of a dumb question is that?" My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Michael, this is not the time for games." But my father's face darkened. He saw the challenge in my eyes. "What kind of a ridiculous question is that?" He repeated Jason's words, his voice low and menacing. "He's my son. A father loves his son. It's the most natural thing in the world." "Is it?" I asked, my gaze unwavering, holding his. "Or is it the most necessary thing in the world? Is it because you've spent 30 years terrified that everyone will find out he's not?" The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was a silent, verbal detonation that sucked all the air out of the room. A strangled, high-pitched gasp came from my mother. Jason's smug look evaporated, replaced by a mask of utter confusion. "What is he talking about?" he demanded, looking from me to our parents. Aunt Diane, who had been sipping her tea, froze, the cup halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with shock. And my father completely fell apart. He didn't shout, he didn't deny it. He just broke. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, gray pallor. His entire facade of patriarchal authority, the foundation of his identity, crumbled into dust in a single, devastating moment. He looked like a man who had been shot and was only just now realizing he was bleeding out. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes, wide with a pure, animal panic, darted to my mother. That single, silent, terrified look that passed between them was a confession more damning than any words could ever be. I let the silence stretch, letting them all suffocate in the toxic truth I had just unleashed. Then, I reached into my briefcase, bypassed all the financial documents, and pulled out a single sheet of folded, yellowed paper. With a deliberate slowness, I slid the paternity test across the polished coffee table. Came to a stop right in front of him. "I found this," I said, my voice soft but carrying in the dead quiet of the room. "In a box of Mom's old letters, hidden away in your old office, along with some very passionate letters from a man named David. I believe you knew him from the country club." My mother let out a small, wounded cry and buried her face in her hands, her body starting to shake with uncontrollable sobs. Jason shot up from the couch, his face a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "What is this? What the hell is going on?" "Mom! Sit down, Jason," I commanded, my voice infused with a newfound authority he had never heard from me before. And to my own surprise, he sank back onto the sofa, stunned into silence. Robert Reynolds stared at the piece of paper as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. The powerful, blustering man I had known and feared my whole life was gone. In his place was a shrunken, broken, terrified old man. "Now," I said, my voice hardening as I finally turned my attention to my brother. "Now that we've established the foundation of this family, let's talk about your business. Let's talk about fraud." For the next 10 minutes, I systematically, mercilessly dismantled them. I pulled out the wire transfers, reading out the dates and amounts. I presented the signed loan agreements. I read aloud, with cold precision, the sworn, notarized statement from Mr. George Wilson, the retired teacher whose life savings Jason had stolen. I then took out the small digital recorder. "And for the matter of intent," I said, "I'd like to play a short recording of a recent conversation with my mother." I pressed play. Her voice, laced with poison, filled the silent room. "It's always been about jealousy, hasn't it? You are a selfish, bitter little man." With each new piece of evidence, Jason grew paler, a sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. My father sank deeper and deeper into his chair, looking like he had aged 20 years. Their lawyer looked increasingly horrified, shuffling his papers, realizing the hopeless, indefensible position his clients were in. He kept glancing from the documents to his clients with a look of pure disgust. When I was done, a tomb-like silence once again descended on the room. It was finally broken by Aunt Diane. She had been watching the entire exchange with a look of growing horror and dawning realization on her face. She stood up, her hands trembling, her cup and saucer rattling. "Robert, Linda," she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief and revulsion. "Is this true? All of it? The money? The lies? The other man?" My mother couldn't speak, her body racked with sobs. My father just stared blankly at the wall, a hollowed-out man. Aunt Diane turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of profound pity and deep shame. "Michael, my dear boy, I had no idea." She then turned to her nephew, Jason, and her expression, which had been soft with me, turned to stone. "And you did this. You took that poor old man's money. You lied to all of us." She shook her head, as if trying to clear it of a nightmare. "I need to leave. I can't be a part of this." She walked out of the room without a single backward glance. Her departure was the final, fatal blow. The family front was shattered. My mother's intended reinforcement had become my most powerful witness. Mr. Thompson stood up, his tall frame seeming to dominate the room. "I believe we are done here," he said, his voice calm, professional, and final. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, you will be hearing from my office regarding the full restitution for the victims of your son's fraudulent activities. Jason," he added, his gaze as sharp and cold as glass, "I would strongly advise you not to leave town." We turned and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of their ruined world, their collapsed stage, crashing down in the silence behind me. As the heavy front door clicked shut, I took my first deep breath of the cool night air. It wasn't a breath of triumph. It was a breath of clean, quiet, and absolute freedom. It was over. The aftermath of that night wasn't a slow burn. It was a wildfire. The carefully constructed world of the Reynolds family didn't just crack. It imploded with a speed and ferocity that was almost biblical. I can only imagine the scene we left behind in that living room. A toxic storm of accusations, tears, and the bitter, corrosive poison of a 30-year-old secret finally unleashed. But I didn't have to imagine what happened next, because the consequences started rolling in with the force of an avalanche, and I had a front row seat. The smartest thing Mr. Thompson ever told me was to anticipate your opponent's dumbest move. "Desperate people do desperate, stupid things, Michael," he had said during one of our planning sessions. "And your brother, for all his charisma, is nothing if not desperate and stupid when cornered." He was absolutely right. 2 days after the disastrous family trial, Jason did something incredibly, predictably stupid. Panicked, feeling the walls closing in, and with his parents now locked in their own private hell and unable to help him, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove to Mr. Wilson's quiet suburban house. He didn't go to apologize. He didn't go to beg for forgiveness. He went to intimidate. I found out later from Mr. Wilson that Jason had been aggressive, a cornered animal. He offered the old teacher a fraction of what he had lost, a paltry sum of a few $1,000s, demanding he sign a hastily written non-disclosure agreement and refuse to cooperate with any legal proceedings. When Mr. Wilson refused, Jason's demeanor changed. He got nasty. He threatened to make Mr. Wilson's life difficult, hinting at legal troubles of his own, suggesting he could drag this out in court for years until the old man was broke. What Jason, in his arrogant panic, didn't know was that Mr. Wilson, on the explicit advice of Mr. Thompson, was prepared. A small, discreet security camera, the kind people use to watch their front porches, had been installed just a week earlier. It was aimed perfectly at the front door, and its microphone was surprisingly sensitive. Captured the entire exchange. Jason's face, twisted in a contemptuous sneer. His voice low and menacing. The audio was crystal clear. The moment Jason issued his first veiled threat, "You don't want to make an enemy of my family, old man," he had crossed a bright, shining line from civil fraud into a serious felony. Witness tampering. Mr. Wilson called me immediately after Jason left, his voice shaking but resolute. I called Mr. Thompson. Within the hour, the video file was securely in our possession. The next morning, Mr. Thompson sent the footage directly to the district attorney's office. They were already building a fraud case based on the mountain of evidence we had provided, but this was the accelerant on the fire. It showed a consciousness of guilt that was impossible to refute. The DA didn't wait. The next afternoon, Jason wasn't arrested discreetly. He was pulled out of his favorite upscale coffee shop in the middle of downtown, a place where he loved to be seen. He was in the middle of a loud phone call, presumably trying to arrange for money to flee, when two plainclothes detectives approached his table. They put him in handcuffs in full view of the lunch crowd, the clatter of silverware stopping as everyone turned to stare. The charge wasn't just fraud anymore. It was witness intimidation, a far more serious offense that made getting bail next to impossible. The local news, always hungry for a story about the downfall of a prominent family, picked it up immediately. The son of prominent former banking executive Robert Reynolds, arrested in fraud and intimidation scheme. The family name my father had been so desperate to protect, the name he had sacrificed his true son for, was now being dragged through the public mud. My parents, predictably, fell apart in their own distinct and dysfunctional ways. My father retreated into a shell of stony, humiliated silence. He locked himself in the house, refusing to answer calls from anyone, even his own lawyer. The shame of his public and private humiliation, the exposure of his son as a criminal and his wife as an adulteress, was too much for his fragile, immense pride to bear. My mother, on the other hand, went on the offensive. It was her only move. She tried to call me relentlessly, but I didn't answer. I had already blocked her number, my father's number, everyone's. So she turned to the only weapon she had left, the telephone and the family grapevine. She started calling relatives, one by one, trying to spin a desperate, tragic narrative of a troubled son being persecuted by a jealous and vindictive one. She painted me as a monster, a cold-hearted betrayer who had destroyed the family over money. It didn't work. Not this time. Aunt Diane, horrified by what she had witnessed firsthand, had already made her own calls. She didn't gossip. She just stated the facts as she saw them. The truth, supported by the very public nature of Jason's arrest, was far more compelling than my mother's desperate, self-serving lies. The family she had tried to rally to her side, the relatives who had enjoyed my father's generosity for years, simply melted away. They didn't want to be associated with the scandal. The phone calls stopped. The invitations dried up. She was an outcast. A week after Jason's arrest, I received one final call from her. It came from a blocked number, the same way Sarah's had all those weeks ago. I answered out of a grim, final curiosity. It was Linda, and she was sobbing. These weren't the crocodile tears of manipulation I had heard on the recording. These were the ragged, ugly, guttural sobs of true and total despair. "Michael, please," she begged, her voice a wreck, stripped of all its former authority. "You have to help him. He's your brother. They're saying he could go to prison for years. Years. You can't let this happen. We're your family. What about the inheritance? We can fix the will, we can give you whatever you want, your store, the house, everything. Just call the DA. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Tell them you were upset and you lied." I listened to her, to this woman who was my mother, as she asked me to commit perjury to save the son she had with another man. And I felt nothing. The knot of pain and anger and obligation that had lived in my stomach for 32 years was just gone. There was a vast, quiet emptiness where it used to be. The hooks she was trying to sink into me, the inheritance, the guilt, the concept of family, they had nothing to grab onto anymore. They just slid right off. When her desperate, rambling plea finally sputtered out, I spoke. My voice was calm and steady. "The family you're talking about, Mom," I said, the word mom feeling foreign and strange on my tongue. "It was never real. It was built on a 30-year-old lie. And it's over now." I paused, letting the finality of my words sink into the silence on the other end of the line. "You still have my number. Don't call me again." Then I did something I should have done 20 years ago. I ended the call. I hung up on her. And then I blocked the number. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. It's funny how life works out. For so long, for my entire life really, I thought my value was something that had to be granted to me by my parents. I saw it as a finite resource that they held, and which they doled out almost exclusively to my brother. I spent 3 decades chasing a ghost, chasing their approval, trying to earn a love that was never really on the table for me. I thought that if I was just responsible enough, successful enough, quiet enough, that one day they would turn around and see me. Being cast out, being told in that cold, hard living room, "You are no longer our son," felt like the end of the world at the time. I remember driving away from that house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, feeling like an astronaut whose tether to the ship had just been cut. I was floating completely alone. But it wasn't an ending. It was a liberation. It was a violent, painful, but absolutely necessary severing that allowed me to finally stand on my own 2 feet, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. It forced me to look around and see who was really there for me, who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide or what my last name was. My legacy, I've come to realize, won't be a name on a building or a dollar amount in a will. I see it differently now. It's in the quiet, contented hum of this bookstore late at night, long after the last customer has gone home. It's in the excited face of a young kid who discovers a book they love in our aisles, a book that might just change their life. It's in the small but growing fund I started with that check, the one that helps good people like Mr. Wilson get back on their feet after being scammed by predators like my brother. It's about taking the deepest, most painful wound of my life and finding a way to transform it into a source of healing and protection for others. That's a legacy that can't be bought or sold. I lost the family I was born into. That's a hard truth. And there's a grief there that will probably always live in a small, quiet corner of my heart. But in its place, I found a family that was built, not by blood, but by choice. Built on shared values, on mutual respect, on laughter in a crowded bookstore, and on the simple, powerful, revolutionary act of showing up for one another, no matter what. And that kind of family, the kind you choose, the kind you build, is the strongest kind there is. It's the kind that can't be threatened, or bought, or broken by the lies of the past. It's real. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was long, but it was important for me to tell it all. I hope it touched you in some way, maybe made you feel a little less alone in whatever battles you're fighting. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and a toxic family obligation? I'd be honored to read your experiences. Please, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. You're not alone.